This is the untold story of how American Sherman swarms shattered the myth of German tank superiority through the eyes of Hauptmann Ingrid Kellner, one of the Wehrmacht's most decorated Tiger commanders and the only woman to lead a heavy tank company in the Third Reich. What we discovered in the forests of Burgundy would change everything we thought we knew about armored warfare. Let's begin. From my position in the commander's cupola of Tiger 117 Valkyrie, I could survey the entire Vosges battlefield through my custom Zeiss optics. March 1945. The Allies were pushing hard toward the Rhine, but here in the mountains of eastern France, we still held the advantage of terrain and superior equipment. I commanded the 2nd Company of Schwere Panzerabteilung 517, a unit that had earned its reputation through blood and steel across 3 years of warfare. My path to this position had been unconventional, to say the least. When the Wehrmacht began accepting women in combat roles in late 1943, I was among the first to volunteer. Driven by a combination of patriotic fervor and a mechanical aptitude that had made me the finest tank driver in my training battalion. The men had been skeptical at first. Tank warfare was considered the ultimate masculine domain, the realm of steel, fire, and split-second life-or-death decisions. But after my first engagement near Metz, where I had personally destroyed 4 American tank destroyers in a single afternoon, even the most hardened Panzer veterans began to show respect. My crew was hand-picked from the best available replacements. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Krause, my gunner, had served with distinction at Prokhorovka and could thread a needle with an 88mm shell at 2 kilometers. Franz Dietrich, our loader, was a former gymnast from Bavaria whose speed and precision kept our rate of fire higher than any other Tiger in the battalion. Heinrich Müller, my driver, had been racing motorcycles before the war and could coax performance from our Maybach engine that the manuals said was impossible. But it was more than just technical proficiency that set us apart. In a war where tank crews rarely survived more than a few months, my team had been together for over a year. We moved as one organism, anticipated each other's needs, and had developed an almost telepathic communication in combat. The statistics painted a clear picture of our dominance. Tiger 117 bore 39 confirmed kill marks along its barrel, a tally that included everything from Soviet T-34s in Hungary to American Shermans in the Bulge. Our battalion collectively had destroyed over 400 enemy vehicles while losing only 8 Tigers to enemy action. The Tiger I was simply the finest tank ever built. Its 88mm KWK-36 gun could penetrate any Allied armor at ranges where their guns were useless against our 100mm frontal armor. The psychological effect was almost as valuable as the tactical advantage. Enemy tank crews would often abandon perfectly functional vehicles rather than face a Tiger in direct combat. We had become legends in our own time. American and British intelligence reports captured from prisoners spoke of German supertanks and their seemingly invincible crews. The Allies had begun avoiding direct confrontations with Tiger units whenever possible, preferring to bypass us rather than engage. This reputation brought both pride and isolation. We were elite, but we were also alone. Regular Panzer units looked up to us with a mixture of admiration and envy, while higher command expected miracles from our small numbers. A typical Tiger company fielded only 12 to 14 operational tanks, compared to the 17 vehicles in a standard Sherman company. But on that cold morning in the Vosges Mountains, with frost still clinging to the pine branches and my breath visible inside the turret, everything I thought I knew about armored warfare was about to be challenged in ways I could never have imagined. The first indication that something was different came from our forward observers at 0547 hours. Gefreiter Hans Beck's voice crackled over the radio from his concealed position on Hill 394. "Tiger Leader, this is Watchdog 1. I have movement in the Colmar Valley, multiple columns of enemy armor advancing north." Standard American probing action, I thought. They had been testing our defenses for weeks, sending small groups of Shermans to probe for weaknesses in our line. Each time we had bloodied them severely and sent them retreating. "Watchdog 1, provide count and composition," I responded, settling into my commander's seat and beginning the familiar pre-combat routine. "Watchdog 1, this is difficult to assess. Initial count shows... stand by." The long pause was unusual. Beck was a veteran observer who had been calling in targets since Normandy. He didn't normally hesitate. "Watchdog 1, report status." "Watchdog 1, I count at least 40, no, 50 Sherman tanks in the first wave alone. There are more columns approaching from multiple directions. This isn't a probe. This is a full-scale assault." 50 Shermans. In my entire combat career, I had never faced more than a dozen enemy tanks simultaneously. Even during the massive tank battles at Kursk, the engagements were usually between roughly equal numbers of opposing vehicles. "Krause, bring the engine to full military power. Dietrich, load armor penetrating and stand by for rapid engagement. Müller, be prepared for immediate movement on my command."
British. Through my periscope, I could see the morning mist beginning to lift from the valley floor. What emerged from that mist would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. Tanks. Dozens and dozens of tanks, stretching across the entire width of the valley in formations I had never seen before. Sherman M4A3s with their distinctive sloped armor, M36 tank destroyers with their open-topped turrets, and newer vehicles I couldn't immediately identify. They were advancing not in the cautious, methodical manner typical of American armor, but in great sweeping waves that reminded me more of cavalry charges than tank warfare. "Mein Gott," whispered Krause, "there are so many." I began counting through my commander's optics, but quickly realized the futility of the exercise. Every time I thought I had reached a total, more vehicles would emerge from the tree line or crest another ridge. This wasn't just a company or even a battalion. This appeared to be an entire armored division committed to a single assault. But it was more than just the numbers that unsettled me. These American crews were moving with a coordination and confidence I had never observed before. They maintained formation discipline while advancing at speeds that should have been impossible for such large groups. Radio intercepts suggested they were using new communication systems that allowed unprecedented coordination between individual tanks. Most disturbing of all, they didn't seem concerned about facing Tigers. Previous American attacks had shown clear reluctance to engage our heavy tanks directly. These crews were advancing straight toward our known positions without hesitation. "All Tiger stations, this is Tiger Leader," I transmitted to my company. "We have multiple enemy armor advancing in division strength. This is not a drill. Move to prepared positions Alpha through Delta and prepare for sustained engagement." My company consisted of 11 operational Tigers positioned along a defensive line that stretched for nearly 3 kilometers. Under normal circumstances, this would have been more than adequate to stop any reasonable attack. But as I watched wave after wave of American armor emerge from the morning mist, I began to question whether our prepared positions would be sufficient. "Tiger leader, this is Tiger 7, came the voice of Lieutenant Erich Zimmermann, one of my most experienced commanders. "I have clear fields of fire on the approaching column. Request permission to engage." "Negative, Tiger 7. Wait until they close to effective range. We need to make every shot count." This was standard doctrine. Allow the enemy to approach within our optimal engagement range while remaining outside theirs. At 2,000 meters, our 88mm guns could penetrate any Allied armor, while their 75mm guns would be largely ineffective against our frontal armor. But as the American formation continued to advance, something unprecedented happened. Instead of bunching up or showing signs of hesitation as they entered our engagement zone, the Sherman formations began to spread out and accelerate. "Zimmermann, you have the first target. Sherman at 1,800 meters. Fire when ready." The crack of Zimmermann's 88mm gun echoed across the valley, and I watched through my optics as the lead American tank erupted in a satisfying explosion of fire and smoke. A perfect kill shot that would normally have sent enemy formations into hasty retreat. But instead of stopping or falling back, something extraordinary happened. The remaining Sherman simply flowed around the burning wreck like water around a stone, maintaining their advance without even slowing down. More disturbing still, I could see other American tanks beginning to return fire while still moving, something their crews had rarely done effectively in previous engagements. "Tiger leader, this is Tiger 3, reported Oberfeldwebel Maria Hoffmann, the only other woman in our battalion. "I count 12 Shermans moving to flank our position from the east. They are using terrain features to mask their approach." "Tiger 9 here," added Feldwebel Klaus Weber. "I've got another group. Looks like tank destroyers setting up overwatch positions on the western ridge." This level of tactical sophistication was far beyond anything we had encountered from American armor units. They were simultaneously conducting frontal assault, flanking maneuvers, and overwatch support, a combined arms approach that suggested extensive training and coordination. My own gunner, Krause, had acquired a target and was waiting for the command to fire. Range, 1,650 meters. Target Sherman moving left to right, ready to engage. Fire! The familiar recoil rocked our Tiger as the 88mm shell streaked toward its target. Another perfect hit, another Sherman destroyed. But as the smoke cleared, I could see that our kill had barely made a dent in the advancing horde. "Load high explosive," I ordered, thinking that spectacular kills might break their morale. Dietrich's hands moved with practice efficiency, loading the next round. High explosive loaded. Grouse's next shot struck a Sherman that was closely followed by 2 others. The explosion was massive, taking out the first tank and severely damaging the second that ground to a halt with smoke pouring from its engine compartment. Under any normal circumstances, such a display of firepower would have sent enemy armor scattering for cover. But these Americans continued their advance as if the loss of individual tanks was simply part of their calculation. As the engagement continued, a terrible mathematical reality began to assert itself. We were achieving kill ratios that exceeded our most optimistic projections. My company had destroyed nearly 20 American tanks in the first 15 minutes of combat. Our armor remained largely impervious to their return fire, and our accuracy was devastatingly effective. But they kept coming. "Tiger leader, ammunition status," I called over the company net.
The responses painted a disturbing picture. We were expending ammunition at rates far higher than planned, not because we were missing, but because there were simply so many targets. Each Tiger carried only 92 rounds for the main gun, and at our current rate of fire, we would be down to high explosive and smoke rounds within the hour. More troubling was the realization that the Americans seemed to understand this arithmetic perfectly. They were accepting catastrophic losses, by any reasonable military standard, in order to force us to expend ammunition. Their industrial capacity allowed them to replace destroyed vehicles faster than we could destroy them. Tiger 7 to Tiger Leader. Zimmerman's voice carried a note of strain I had never heard before. I've eliminated 8 confirmed targets, but I count at least 15 more moving toward my position. They're not retreating, they're adapting. He was right. As I observed the battlefield through my commander's optics, I could see that the American crews were learning from each engagement. They were identifying our firing positions and beginning to coordinate their attacks to exploit our limited numbers. One group of Shermans would engage us frontally, forcing us to reveal our positions, while others maneuvered for flanking shots. When we shifted fire to deal with the flankers, the frontal group would advance. It was a sophisticated tactical approach that suggested extensive training in fighting outnumbered but technologically superior opponents. Kraus, target the lead tank destroyer on the ridge, range to 100 meters. I see him. Adjusting for wind and elevation. Ready. Fire. The shot was perfect, striking the M36 just below the gun mantlet and penetrating into the fighting compartment. The vehicle disappeared in a ball of flame that must have been visible for kilometers. But even as we celebrated the kill, I could see 2 more tank destroyers moving into position to replace it. This was the moment I realized we weren't fighting individual tank crews anymore. We were engaging a military-industrial system that could absorb tremendous losses and continue functioning. Each destroyed Sherman represented maybe 0.1% of American tank production for a single month. Each lost Tiger represented nearly 1% of German heavy tank production for the same period. The Americans had learned what we should have anticipated. They couldn't build better tanks than us individually, but they could build far more tanks than we could handle collectively. They'd turned quantity into its own form of quality. What made this realization even more disturbing was the gradual recognition that these American crews were not the poorly trained conscripts our propaganda had portrayed. Their radio discipline was excellent, their tactical coordination was sophisticated, and their individual crew skills, while perhaps not matching our elite standards, were far more competent than we had been led to believe. During a brief lull in the action, I intercepted an American radio transmission that had been broadcast in the clear. Charlie 6, this is Charlie 2-7. We've taken casualties, but we're still mobile, moving to support Delta Company's flanking maneuver. These Germans fight hard, but we've got them outnumbered 5-1. Stay disciplined and we'll get through this. The tone was professional, calm and confident. This wasn't panic or desperation. It was the sound of soldiers who understood their mission and were prepared to accept the costs necessary to accomplish it. Tiger Leader, this is Watchdog 1. Beck's voice crackled over the radio from his observation post. I have eyes on a second wave approaching from the south. Count appears to be at least 30 more vehicles. A second wave? We had already engaged over 60 American tanks and tank destroyers, destroying perhaps 25 of them, and now another 30 were entering the battle. The mathematics were becoming impossible to ignore. All Tiger stations, ammunition status report, I called. The responses confirmed my fears. We were averaging less than 50 rounds remaining per vehicle, enough for perhaps 20 more minutes of sustained combat at current engagement rates. After that, we would be reduced to high explosive and smoke rounds, largely useless against enemy armor. Tiger Leader, this is Tiger 11, came the voice of Unteroffizier Paul Richter, my newest and youngest commander. I've got Shermans closing on my position from multiple directions. Request permission to withdraw to secondary positions. Richter was barely 19 years old, a brilliant young officer who had earned his Tiger command through exceptional performance at the Panzer School. But he had never faced anything like this sustained assault by numerically superior forces. Negative, Tiger 11, maintain position and continue engaging.
Support will be available shortly." But as I gave that order, I knew it was probably a lie. We had no meaningful reserves, and higher command was unlikely to commit additional Tigers to what they would probably view as a localized engagement. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission from battalion headquarters. "Tiger Leader, this is Panzer Command, Oberst Erich von Mannheim speaking. Status report on current engagement." Von Mannheim was old-school Prussian military aristocracy, a career officer who had commanded tanks since the Polish campaign. He represented everything traditional about German military doctrine, the belief that superior training, equipment, and individual fighting spirit could overcome any disadvantage in numbers.
"Sir, we are engaged with enemy armor in division strength. Estimate 80 to 100 American tanks and tank destroyers committed to this assault. We have achieved favorable kill ratios, but are being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Recommend immediate reinforcement and artillery support." There was a long pause before von Mannheim responded, and I could almost picture him in the command bunker, studying his maps and trying to process information that didn't fit his understanding of how tank battles should develop. "Tiger Leader, your unit has never failed to hold assigned positions against American armor. Intelligence estimates suggest this is likely a diversionary attack. You are to hold your current positions and continue engaging until enemy forces withdraw. I cannot authorize retreat based on numerical concerns alone." This response crystallized everything wrong with our command structure's understanding of the new reality we faced. Von Mannheim was thinking in terms of traditional tank engagements, where roughly equal forces maneuvered for tactical advantage. He couldn't conceive of an enemy willing to accept 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 loss ratios in order to achieve strategic objectives. "Sir, with respect, this is not a diversionary attack. The Americans have committed massive resources to breaking through our positions. Their tactics suggest they are prepared to accept heavy losses to achieve breakthrough. Tiger Leader, you have the finest tanks and crews in the Wehrmacht. Your reputation is built on achieving the impossible. I expect you to maintain that reputation. Hold your positions. That is an order." The radio went silent, leaving me to contemplate an impossible situation. I had 11 Tigers facing over 100 American vehicles, with ammunition running low and no prospect of reinforcement. Traditional military wisdom suggested that retreat would be the logical choice, preserve forces to fight another day rather than sacrifice them in a hopeless engagement. But military tradition, personal honor, and direct orders all demanded that we stand and fight regardless of the odds. The conflict between practical necessity and institutional expectations was becoming unbearable. Looking at my tactical situation display, I could see the full scope of what we faced. The Americans weren't just overwhelming us locally, they were demonstrating an entirely new approach to mechanized warfare. Instead of trying to match our technical superiority vehicle for vehicle, they were using industrial capacity as a weapon of war. Intelligence reports I had seen suggested that American factories were producing over 2,000 Sherman tanks per month, while German production of all tank types combined rarely exceeded 800 vehicles monthly. The Tiger I, our most capable tank, was being produced at a rate of perhaps 40 per month during optimal conditions. But it went beyond simple production numbers. The Americans had developed doctrine, training, and logistics systems specifically designed to overwhelm technically superior but numerically inferior opponents. They were willing to accept casualties that would be considered catastrophic by German standards because they could replace both equipment and trained crews faster than we could destroy them. This represented a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare itself.
The age of the individual ace, the brilliant tactician, and the superior weapon system was giving way to an industrial approach that treated individual battles as components in a larger manufacturing and logistics equation. Tiger Leader, this is Tiger 7. I'm down to 15 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. Multiple Shermans are moving to assault my position directly. Tiger 3 here, added Hauptmann. Same situation, low on ammunition, and they're getting close enough for their guns to be effective against our side armor. This was the critical moment. We could continue fighting until our ammunition was exhausted and we were overrun, earning posthumous honors but accomplishing nothing strategic, or we could attempt to preserve our forces for future engagements where they might be more effective. The decision would define not just our immediate fate, but my understanding of what it meant to be a soldier in this new form of warfare. Tiger Leader, this is Tiger Leader. I transmitted, knowing that my next words would either save my company or brand me as a coward. All Tiger stations, this is Tiger Leader. Begin fighting withdrawal to checkpoint Bravo. We will conduct a mobile defense, making the enemy pay for every kilometer while preserving our fighting capability for future operations. The response was immediate and telling. But Tiger Leader, came Richter's voice, tight with confusion. We haven't lost a single Tiger. Our kill ratio is over 4-1. Doctrine says we're winning. He was absolutely correct by every metric we had been trained to value. We were destroying enemy vehicles faster than they were destroying ours. Our technical superiority was as decisive as ever. By traditional standards, we were achieving a stunning victory. But I could see what the traditional metrics missed. The Americans could sustain 4-1 losses indefinitely. We could not sustain even 1-1 losses for more than a few engagements. Mathematics, not tactics, would determine the outcome of this battle. As we began our withdrawal, my radio crackled with an urgent transmission from higher command. Tiger Leader, this is Panzer Command. Reports from forward observers indicate your unit is withdrawing from assigned defensive positions. Explain immediately. Von Mannheim's voice carried the ice-cold fury of a traditional military officer watching his subordinates abandon principles he considered sacred.
Sir, we are conducting a fighting withdrawal in the face of overwhelming enemy numbers. We have achieved significant tactical success, but cannot hold current positions against sustained assault by superior numbers. Tiger Leader, in 3 years of combat, your unit has never withdrawn from American armor. Your reputation is built on achieving victory through superior training and equipment. I cannot authorize withdrawal based on casualty concerns for inferior enemy forces. This exchange encapsulated the fundamental disconnect between traditional military thinking and the industrial warfare that was emerging. Von Mannheim was correct that we had never retreated from American tanks before, but we had never faced American tanks in these numbers or employed with this level of coordination. Sir, the tactical situation has evolved beyond traditional parameters. The enemy is demonstrating new doctrine that prioritizes breakthrough over casualty avoidance. They are prepared to accept losses that would be strategically unacceptable to us. Tiger Leader, you have Tigers, the finest tanks ever built. You have crews trained to standards the enemy cannot match. You have tactical positions prepared over months of defensive construction. Use these advantages properly, and the enemy numbers become irrelevant. Von Mannheim's response revealed the tragic limitation of our military leadership. They understood warfare as it had been, not warfare as it was becoming. They could not conceive that industrial capacity might trump individual technical superiority,
or that an enemy might deliberately choose tactics that accepted massive casualties in order to achieve strategic objectives. Sir, respectfully requesting immediate artillery support and reinforcement by additional armored units. Tiger Leader, artillery is committed to supporting infantry operations along the main line of resistance. Additional armored units are not available. You have sufficient resources to complete your mission. Use them properly. The radio went silent, leaving me alone with an impossible decision. Obey orders and sacrifice my company in a hopeless defense, or preserve them for future battles where they might accomplish something meaningful. As I observed the continuing American advance through my commander's optics, the full implications of what we were witnessing began to crystallize. This wasn't just a local tactical problem, it was a preview of how future warfare would be conducted. The Americans had solved the fundamental equation of modern mechanized combat. Industrial production capacity plus adequate training plus acceptable doctrine could overwhelm individual technical superiority. They didn't need to build better tanks than Tigers. They needed to build enough adequate tanks to make our technical advantages irrelevant. More troubling was the realization that this approach extended beyond immediate battlefield tactics. The Americans were demonstrating logistical capabilities that allowed them to sustain these operations indefinitely. Fresh crews, replacement vehicles, unlimited ammunition supplies, all the resources necessary to maintain offensive pressure until we were simply ground down through attrition. Tiger Leader, this is Tiger 9. Weber's voice carried new concern. I'm observing what appears to be a maintenance unit moving up behind the assault forces. They're already beginning recovery operations on damaged American vehicles. This was perhaps the most ominous development yet. Not only could the Americans replace destroyed vehicles faster than we could destroy them, they were implementing field repair capabilities that would return damaged but repairable tanks to combat within hours rather than weeks. Meanwhile, every Tiger lost to enemy action or mechanical failure was effectively irreplaceable. Our maintenance capabilities were excellent for small-scale operations, but completely inadequate for sustained, high-intensity combat against numerically superior forces. The weight of command in this situation was unlike anything I had experienced in 3 years of combat. Every decision carried the potential for catastrophic consequences, not just for my own crew, but for the 11 other Tiger crews under my command and the wider strategic situation along our sector of the front. "Krause," I said over the intercom, "what's your assessment of our current tactical situation?" My gunner had been with me long enough to speak frankly, especially in desperate circumstances. "Hauptmann, I've never seen anything like this. These Americans, they're not fighting like Americans used to fight. They're willing to trade tanks for position at rates that seem insane." "But it's working," added Dietrich from the loader's position. "They're going to push us out of our positions through sheer weight of numbers." Mueller, our driver, had been unusually quiet during the engagement, but now he spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been watching their movement patterns. These crews have trained extensively for exactly this kind of assault. This isn't desperation, it's doctrine." The recognition that we were facing a deliberate tactical evolution rather than simply overwhelming numbers made our situation even more disturbing. The Americans had studied our capabilities and developed specific countermeasures that turned our strengths into irrelevant advantages. My radio crackled with reports from across the company. Tiger Leader, Tiger 5. I'm down to 8 rounds of armor-piercing, multiple Shermans approaching to within 800 meters of my position. Tiger Leader, Tiger 12. Engine temperature is running hot. We may have taken a hit to the cooling system. Tiger Leader, Tiger 2. Gunner reports optics damage from near miss. Effectiveness reduced. Each report added to the cumulative picture of a company being systematically degraded by an enemy willing to accept massive losses to achieve tactical objectives.
As the American assault entered its second hour, I faced the defining moment of my military career. Continue following orders that would result in the destruction of my company for no strategic gain, or make the decision to preserve trained crews and irreplaceable equipment for battles where they might accomplish something meaningful. All Tiger stations, this is Tiger Leader, I transmitted, knowing that my next words would determine not just our immediate fate, but how history would judge our actions. We are facing an enemy demonstrating new tactical doctrine that we are not equipped to counter with current positioning and support. I am ordering immediate withdrawal to secondary defensive positions where we can continue resistance under more favorable conditions. The response was immediate and mixed. Tiger Leader, Tiger 7, confirming withdrawal order, but this feels like retreat from inferior enemies. Tiger Leader, Tiger 3, understanding withdrawal order. Tactical situation is untenable. Tiger Leader, Tiger 11, request clarification. Are we abandoning defensive mission? These responses captured the fundamental tension we all felt. Professional military judgment suggested withdrawal was the only logical choice. Military tradition and institutional expectations demanded that we stand and die rather than yield ground to any enemy, regardless of circumstances. All stations, we are not abandoning our mission. We are adapting our tactics to match enemy capabilities. The Americans have demonstrated that they are willing and able to sustain assault operations at casualty rates we cannot match. We will continue resistance from positions where our technical advantages can be employed more effectively. As we began our fighting withdrawal, something even more ominous appeared on the tactical horizon. Fresh dust clouds were rising from multiple directions, indicating that this assault was merely the first wave of a much larger operation. Tiger Leader, this is Watchdog 1, Beck reported from his observation post. I have eyes on additional enemy columns approaching from the northeast and southwest. This appears to be a coordinated multi-axis assault. The Americans weren't just overwhelming us locally. They were demonstrating operational capabilities that suggested a fundamental shift in how mechanized warfare would be conducted. Multiple armored divisions moving in coordination, supported by unprecedented logistics capabilities, implementing doctrine specifically designed to overwhelm technically superior but numerically inferior opponents. Tiger Leader to all stations, I transmitted, knowing that we were witnessing the end of one era of warfare and the beginning of another. Prepare for sustained combat operations. Whatever happens here today, remember that we are witnessing the evolution of mechanized warfare itself. The lessons we learn and survive to report may determine how future engagements are fought. But even as I spoke those words, I realized that the most important lesson was already clear. Individual technical superiority, no matter how decisive, could be overcome by sufficient numbers properly employed. The age of the tank ace was ending, replaced by industrial warfare where production capacity mattered more than individual skill. The radio crackled with an incoming priority transmission. Tiger Leader, this is Sturmbannführer Lisa Weber of schwere SS Panzerabteilung 503. We are moving to your sector with 8 King Tigers. Can you hold position for another 30 minutes? Reinforcements. Elite reinforcements, with the most powerful tanks Germany had ever produced. But even as hope flickered, I realized that 8 King Tigers, no matter how capable, were unlikely to change the fundamental mathematics we faced.
What I would discover about these SS Panzer reinforcements and the true scope of American tank production capabilities would challenge everything I thought I knew about courage, technology, and the nature of modern combat. Sturmbannführer Lisa Weber arrived like a force of nature, her King Tiger thundering through the forest with 7 more of the massive 70-ton behemoths following in perfect formation. The SS Panzerabteilung 503 was legendary, an elite unit equipped with Germany's most powerful tanks and crewed by fanatics who had never retreated from any battlefield. Weber herself was a contradiction that embodied the desperate measures of our final war years. A former racing driver from Munich, she had volunteered for Panzer service in 1943 and earned her command through a combination of ruthless efficiency and political connections within the SS hierarchy. Where I had fought to gain acceptance in the Wehrmacht's male-dominated tank corps, Weber had embraced the SS ideology that valued results over convention. "Kellner, I hear you're having some trouble with some tin cans." The contempt in her voice was typical SS arrogance. But as I watched her King Tiger's 88mm L71 gun transverse toward the approaching Sherman formations, I felt a surge of hope. 8 King Tigers, with armor up to 180mm thick and guns that could penetrate any Allied tank at extreme range, might actually change the tactical equation we faced. "Weber, glad to have the support, but you need to understand, this isn't typical American tactics. They're accepting casualty rates that would break any normal unit." "I've read the reports," she replied curtly. "Mass assault doctrine, overwhelming numbers, industrial replacement rates. The SS has developed specific countermeasures for exactly this scenario."
Her confidence was infectious. But as I observed the battlefield through my optics, I could see that the American assault was entering its 3rd hour with no signs of diminishing pressure. If anything, the addition of fresh forces seemed to have encouraged them to commit additional reserves. "All King Tiger stations, this is Tiger Leader Weber," she transmitted to her unit. "Target priority is enemy armor at maximum range. We will demonstrate why German engineering superiority cannot be overcome by mere numbers." The first salvo from the SS King Tigers was devastating. Their long-barreled 88mm guns reached out to distances where Sherman return fire was completely ineffective, turning 8 American tanks into burning wrecks in less than 30 seconds. For a brief moment, it seemed like traditional German tactical doctrine might prevail after all. But then something happened that challenged everything we thought we knew about American capabilities. Instead of retreating or taking cover after suffering these catastrophic losses, the Sherman formations did something unprecedented. They charged. Not a desperate, disorganized assault, but a coordinated mass attack that brought dozens of tanks racing toward our positions at maximum speed. "What are they doing?" Weber's voice carried genuine puzzlement for the first time. I watched through my commander's optics as wave after wave of Shermans closed the distance, accepting horrific casualties but relentlessly reducing the range where our superior armor and guns provided decisive advantage. It was tactical suicide by any reasonable standard, except it was working. "They're trading space for time," I realized aloud, "getting close enough to make their guns effective against our side armor." "Impossible," Weber responded. "No commander would sacrifice that many tanks for marginal tactical advantage." But even as she spoke, American shells began finding their marks. At close range, the Sherman 75mm gun could penetrate the side armor of even a King Tiger. The mathematical advantage of our superior technology was being negated by simple geometry and overwhelming numbers. "King Tiger 4 to leader," came the voice of one of Weber's subordinates. "I'm taking hits from multiple directions. They've gotten inside minimum engagement distance." This was the moment I understood the true genius of American tactical evolution. They had studied our capabilities extensively and developed doctrines specifically designed to neutralize our advantages. Get close enough fast enough, accepting whatever loss is necessary, and turn every engagement into a close-range melee where numbers mattered more than individual vehicle superiority. "All units, begin withdrawal to Ridge Alpha," Weber ordered. Her earlier confidence replaced by grim professionalism.
We cannot maintain effective fire superiority under these conditions. But as we attempted to disengage, the full scope of American preparation became apparent. They had anticipated our withdrawal routes and positioned forces to intercept us. Tank destroyers with high-velocity guns were already in overwatch positions, while additional Sherman formations moved to block our escape routes. "Weber," I transmitted privately, "how much intelligence did your SS units have about American industrial capabilities?" Her pause before responding told me everything I needed to know. "More than we shared with regular Wehrmacht units. The numbers are disturbing." What Weber revealed during our fighting retreat shattered every assumption I had held about the strategic balance of the war. SS intelligence estimates suggested that American factories were producing over 4,000 tanks per month by early 1945, compared to Germany's total armored vehicle production of fewer than 800 monthly. But the numbers were even worse than simple production statistics suggested. The Americans had developed training systems that could produce competent tank crews in months rather than the years required for German elite standards. They had logistics networks that could keep thousands of tanks supplied and operational across multiple theaters simultaneously. Most devastating of all, they had demonstrated the willingness to accept casualty rates that would be politically impossible in Germany. American industrial capacity meant that losing 100 tanks to destroy 20 German tanks was considered an acceptable trade-off because they could replace their losses within a week, while ours would take months to replace. "The reports from the Ardennes offensive were classified at the highest levels," Weber explained as her King Tiger engaged a flanking group of Shermans. "We destroyed over 800 American tanks during the Battle of the Bulge. Within 2 weeks, intelligence indicated they had replaced every single loss and committed additional reserves to counterattack operations." This revelation recontextualized everything we had experienced during the past 3 years of fighting. Every tactical victory, every successful defense, every demonstration of German technical superiority had been strategically meaningless because our enemies possessed replacement capabilities that made individual battle outcomes irrelevant. "How long has High Command known about this?" I asked. "Since at least mid-1944, Weber replied grimly. But the information was restricted to SS leadership and selected Wehrmacht commanders. The theory was that revealing the true scope of Allied production capabilities would damage morale. Instead, they had allowed thousands of tank crews like mine to believe that tactical excellence could overcome strategic reality. We had been fighting a war we could not possibly win, using methods that only delayed inevitable defeat."
As our combined withdrawal continued, I watched the systematic destruction of everything I had believed about armored warfare. My Tiger Company, which had begun the day with 11 operational tanks, was down to 7. Weber's SS unit had lost 3 of their supposedly invincible King Tigers to close-range American fire. But the human cost went beyond simple vehicle losses. These were trained crews representing thousands of hours of specialized education and years of combat experience. Each tank commander lost was irreplaceable in ways that went far beyond industrial production statistics. "Tiger Leader, this is Tiger 11, came Richter's voice over the radio. His youthful enthusiasm had been replaced by something harder and more bitter. "I count at least 60 American vehicles still operational and pursuing. How is this possible?" The question captured the fundamental disconnect between our training and the reality we faced. Richter had been educated in tactical doctrine that emphasized individual excellence, superior equipment, and traditional notions of military honor. Nothing in his background had prepared him for industrial warfare, where individual skill became secondary to production capacity. "Tiger 11, maintain formation and continue withdrawal," I responded. "The enemy has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our previous intelligence estimates." But privately, I wondered how to explain to a 19-year-old tank commander that everything he had been taught about warfare was becoming obsolete. The age of the individual ace, the brilliant tactician, and the superior weapon system was ending before our eyes. Kellner. Weber's voice carried new urgency. I'm getting reports from other sectors. This isn't an isolated assault. The Americans are implementing this mass attack doctrine across the entire front. The implications were staggering. If the Americans could sustain these casualty rates while maintaining offensive pressure along multiple sectors simultaneously, then German defensive strategy based on tactical superiority would collapse entirely. The crisis came when we reached our planned defensive positions on Ridge Alpha, only to discover that American forces had somehow anticipated our movement and were already in position. Tank destroyers with high-velocity guns commanded the key terrain, while Sherman formations moved to encircle our remaining forces. All units, this is Weber. We are surrounded by superior numbers with limited ammunition and no prospect of reinforcement. Recommendations. The radio silence that followed was more eloquent than any response. Every commander in our combined force understood the mathematical reality we faced. We could fight and die heroically, accomplishing nothing beyond adding on names to casualty reports. Or we could attempt to preserve trained personnel and equipment for potential future operations. Weber, Kellner here. What are your orders regarding surrender negotiations? This violated every tradition of German military honor, but it reflected the practical reality that continuing resistance would achieve nothing beyond symbolic value. We were facing an enemy that could replace their losses faster than we could inflict them, using tactics specifically designed to negate our technological advantages. Negative on surrender, Weber responded immediately. SS units do not surrender to enemy forces under any circumstances. Her reply embodied the fundamental problem with German military culture in this phase of the war. Institutional pride and ideological commitment prevented adaptation to changed strategic circumstances. We were required to sacrifice ourselves for principles that had become tactically irrelevant. But then something unexpected happened that would change my understanding of warfare forever. An American tank commander approached our positions under a white flag, something I had never witnessed in 3 years of combat on the eastern and western fronts. The Sherman M4A3 stopped at approximately 200 meters from our defensive line, and a figure emerged from the commander hatch. German commanders, I am Colonel Sarah Mitchell, commanding the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A. I request parley to discuss terms for medical evacuation of wounded personnel. Weber's immediate response was predictable. American forces will withdraw immediately or face renewed engagement. But I found myself curious about this unprecedented situation. In my entire combat career, I had never had direct communication with an enemy tank commander outside of intercepted radio transmissions. Colonel Mitchell, I am Hauptmann Kellner, Wehrmacht. What terms are you proposing? We have wounded personnel from both forces who require immediate medical attention. I propose a temporary ceasefire to allow evacuation and medical treatment according to Geneva Convention protocols. This was completely outside my experience of warfare against either Soviet or American forces. The concept of battlefield medical cooperation between active combatants seemed to belong to an earlier, more civilized era of warfare. Weber, what are your instructions regarding medical cooperation with enemy forces? Her reply revealed the ideological rigidity that had become characteristic of SS doctrine. Institutional pride and ideological commitment prevented adaptation to changed strategic circumstances. We were required to sacrifice ourselves for principles that had become tactically irrelevant. 3 days later, my remaining Tigers were ordered to surrender as part of a general capitulation in our sector. The war in Europe ended 6 weeks after that, with German armored forces that had once dominated European battlefields reduced to scattered remnants hiding in forests and abandoned towns. In Allied prisoner camps, I met tank commanders from across the German military, Wehrmacht, SS, and Luftwaffe personnel who had witnessed the same systematic destruction of everything we thought we knew about warfare. The conversations were remarkably similar. Tactical excellence rendered meaningless by strategic industrial capacity. The Americans didn't defeat us, observed Oberst von Mannheim during one particularly reflective evening in the camp. They simply demonstrated that individual military virtue cannot overcome systematic resource advantages indefinitely. But the most profound realization came from conversations with captured American tank crews. They weren't the poorly trained conscripts our propaganda had portrayed, nor were they the industrial automatons we had imagined. They were professional soldiers who had adapted their methods to match their strategic capabilities. "We knew we couldn't match your individual tank skills," explained one captured Sherman commander, "so we developed tactics that made individual skills less relevant. Mass coordination, rapid replacement, acceptable loss doctrine. It was all designed specifically to counter your advantages." The Americans had solved the fundamental equation of industrial warfare. Adequate training plus sufficient numbers plus sustainable logistics could overcome individual excellence. They didn't need to produce better tank crews than us. They needed to produce enough adequate crews to make our superior training strategically irrelevant. But perhaps the most profound realization came from conversations with captured American tank crews. They weren't the poorly trained conscripts our propaganda had portrayed, nor were they the industrial automatons we had imagined. They were professional soldiers who had adapted their methods to match their strategic capabilities. "We knew we couldn't match your individual tank skills," explained one captured Sherman commander, "so we developed tactics that made individual skills less relevant. Mass coordination, rapid replacement, acceptable loss doctrine. It was all designed specifically to counter your advantages." The Americans had solved the fundamental equation of industrial warfare. Adequate training plus sufficient numbers plus sustainable logistics could overcome individual excellence. They didn't need to produce better tank crews than us. They needed to produce enough adequate crews to make our superior training strategically irrelevant.